Welcome to Floriade Reimagined Pet Stay In, the COVID alternative to dog stay out. I'm Karen Viggers and this is my dog friend Toffee who's going to help us with this session today. We're going to talk about pets in the garden. Floriade and spring are a very big thing in Canberra. We always think of Floriade as the central event in Canberra's spring. And it's the time when the frosts end and the sun comes out and we start to get out into our garden. But there's some things we have to be careful about when we're out in the garden with our pets, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The first thing I wanted to talk about was compost and pets. A lot of us really like to develop our own compost and use our veggie scraps and pop them in the compost bin and cover them up with a bit of dirt and some lawn clippings to make really nice, rich fertiliser for our veggie gardens or for other parts of our gardens. But there are some serious problems for pets with compost. When we have all that rotting and fermenting food in our compost heaps, it creates toxins that are really problematic for dogs and especially for their livers. So we have to be very careful if we have hungry dogs that like to hunt out food, that we don't allow them access to our compost heaps. For instance, if we have Labradors and Beagles and some other dogs that are very hungry, they will often attempt to try and break into compost heaps because it smells so good, all that rotting food, and they just want to get their jowls around it. What we often do with that compost is then we take it and we dig it into our veggie gardens. And we do need to watch out for our pets at that time too when we're putting that fresh compost in the veggie garden. What happened one time with me and with Toffee is that my husband and I, in our veggie garden, we dug in a whole heap of wonderful compost that was really oozy and gooey and maybe that's not ideal, but we dug it into our compost heap and then we went inside and we forgot about Toffee. She asked to go out and 20 minutes later she came to the door with a black face and she had gotten into and chewed through all the disgusting rotting stuff that was in the veggie garden. So being a vet, I knew that what I had to do was get her to the vet clinic straight away and make her vomit up all that horrible stuff because those toxins can cause liver failure, which initially starts to show up as potentially your dog salivating and getting tremors and the shakes, and it can lead to convulsions and even to death. So it's really serious if your dog gets into the compost that they are seen to by a vet. Another aspect of composting that can be problematic for pets as well is grass clippings. Often we think that that's not problematic for animals, but if we leave it, for instance, in a wheelbarrow and then we get some rain on it and the grass starts to ferment, it can produce toxins and aflatoxins that are toxic for our dogs. And in fact, one time we had a pair of golden retrievers present to the vet clinic who'd had a good chow down on some grass clippings in a wheelbarrow, and they ended up so sick with liver disease that they were in hospital on a drip for almost a week. So it was a very expensive round of mowing the lawn that went badly wrong. So you do need to be very careful with those sorts of things as well. Now that we have green bins in Canberra that we can put those grass clippings in, that's a much safer place to put them than to have them lying around in the garden. Another thing that you need to be careful of not to put in your compost bin is these sorts of corn cobs are a disaster. Oh, Toffee thinks that's great. But corn cobs are a disaster for dogs and they find them really attractive. What happens when the kernels are removed by the dog chewing on them from the corn cob is it makes a perfect plug for the dog's intestines, and it is one of the most common things that vets remove from dogs' intestines. And that is not an easy task. It requires an anaesthetic, an exploratory laparotomy and cutting into a dog's intestines. It can be quite hard to find sometimes too, to find out that there is a corn cob in there. So I would advise if you're eating any corn cobs, they go straight in your rubbish bin and not in your compost heap. The next thing I wanted to talk about was pets and poisons in the garden. People often think that their neighbours might have poisoned their pets, or that there's some creepy person that walks around the suburbs throwing baits over the fence to poison noisy dogs. But most often, the person that accidentally poisons their own dogs is the actual owners. I'm from Melbourne, and we used to see the biggest event of the year after the AFL Grand Final everyone would go out into their garden, decide to plant some veggies, and the next thing they'd throw some snail bait in the garden. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the problems with snail bait. Now, there are 3 different types of snail bait that are available in the hardwares and sometimes in the supermarkets. There's the green or Defender, it comes under different names as well, the green snail bait, which is very problematic for your dog. There's also a blue one called Basol. It also is problematic, and those two are fairly similar in their effects on pets. And there's also this one that used to be marketed as pet safe. It's an iron EDTA snail bait and is most definitely not safe for your pet. So the thing with snail bait pellets is that poisoned snails also poisons pets. If your pet even eats a small amount of snail bait, it's really important that you ring your vet straight away. They will want to see your pet, even if it's not showing any symptoms at all, and to make it vomit to see if there's any snail bait in the stomach. Because as soon as your pet absorbs that snail bait, we can't do anything much about it then except to support the pet. So the signs of the blue or the green snail bait poisoning is that within a very short time, even 10 minutes after your dog ingests that snail bait, depending on how much it's eaten, it can start to salivate first and then start to get tremors and shakes, and then vomiting and diarrhea can develop, and then convulsions, and your pet can actually die from snail bait poisoning. It really is very serious. So when you go to the vet clinic, the first thing the vet will do if your dog's not too shaky and wobbly is to give that injection to make the dog vomit and bring up any snail bait. But if already the dog is starting to shake and convulse, the first thing your vet will want to do is try and control those convulsions. And in that case, where they won't be able to make your pet vomit, but they may need to anaesthetise the pet to flush the stomach or to give the dog an enema to remove as much of that snail bait as possible. The unfortunate thing is that whatever's already absorbed has to play its course, and then it can take a number of days for the vet to have the animal in, sometimes even anaesthetised, to make sure those convulsions don't resume. So it's really important not to use those snail baits in your garden. This iron EDTA type of snail bait used to be thought of and marketed as pet safe, but then it was discovered that it was most definitely not pet safe. There is no pet safe snail bait on the market anywhere. This one acts in a slightly different way. It causes iron accumulation in your pet's body, and then that causes bleeding into the gut, and it can cause problems for the liver as well, with lethargy and weakness, diarrhea with blood, sometimes vomiting. So a little more sinister and a little more slow to show its effects, but equally serious. Your dog can die from that as well. So there is no safe snail bait. Snail bait and pets do not mix. If you're going to use it in your veggie garden, make sure the veggie garden is fenced and that your dog cannot get access to it. And be really careful in your garden sheds as well. I also wanted to talk about rat poisons and your pets, especially dogs, because they're the ones that most often consume it. We tend to use rat bait sometimes in our garden sheds or under the house to get rid of rat and mice infestations, but these also are really problematic for your pets. So the way that rat baits work is they interfere with internal clotting, so it prevents your dog from clotting their own blood inside their body. There's 2 different types. One is the old rat sack that has the green sort of granules. That's a warfarin-based product, and these other ones that come in sort of blocks, they're dicoumarins. So with the rat sack one that is the green pellets, the principle is that the rat had to eat it at the bait station a few times in order to be intoxicated with the poison. With these other blue types of baits, they only need to feed once. So these ones are shorter acting, the green pellets, and these ones are much longer acting. But they both act in a similar way in preventing a dog from clotting their blood properly. So often people think, oh, my dog ate rat bait a few days ago and it's fine now. I got over that and now it's sick with something else. It's really lethargic and quiet, and they go down to the vet. Well, in fact, that is the rat bait exerting its influence. So what happens, because your dog can't clot, it starts to bleed inside its body. It may bleed into its lungs and cough up blood. It It may bleed into its abdomen and get a big swollen abdomen. It may bleed into its bowel and get blood in its motions, or it may vomit up blood, or even if your dog bumps into something, they can bleed under the skin and get a hematoma. It's really serious. Dogs can die from this, and it's something you must see your vet for straight away. Now, seeing your vet sooner rather than later is best, because once again, if there's some in your dog's stomach, the vet will want to make it vomit to get that out as soon as possible. Your vet may decide to do a blood test as well to check whether, if we're not sure whether the dog's eaten any and we couldn't get much up in the vomit, might do a blood test to check that as well. And your dog may be required to go on medication. If your dog is actually suffering from the effects of anemia and bleeding due to rat poisoning, it may have to even have a blood transfusion and stay in hospital on medication for a few days before it can go home. And that's where the difference between the two comes in quite importantly. With these longer acting ones, your dog will have to stay on medication for about 21 days. These ones are shorter acting, it's about a week. But again, I think if you've got pets, then it's probably best not to use any poisons at all. The last thing I wanted to talk about today was poisonous plants in your garden and their impacts on pets. There's a really great pet poison helpline that you can look at online that lists all the different toxic plants that are potentially in your garden. Mostly you're pretty okay unless you have a dog that likes to chew on plants. One thing I particularly wanted to mention was lilies, which are toxic to the kidneys of both cats and dogs, but particularly cats. And if a cat chews on or licks any part of a lily plant, it can cause acute renal failure. And the way that presents in a cat is with sudden onset of extreme drinking and going to urinate, to the toilet, and also vomiting, and any part of the lily plant, even the vase water. So some cats like to drink water in vases, but even the vase water of lilies is highly toxic to cats. So I would recommend not having lilies in your house. And because of the large number of lilies that are also toxic to dogs if they chew on them, not having lilies in your garden as well. I also wanted to mention bulbs because they seem like harmless things, and we love our jonquils and our daffodils in springtime, but they can be problematic for pets as well. It's the actual bulb that's usually causing the issue. Sometimes dogs will find bulbs in the garden shed and think it's like a toy to play with and pick it up and chew it and throw it around, and they can cause significant problems. So the signs that they will cause is quite similar to what you see when a dog eats compost. And so this is the difficult thing sometimes, working out what it is that's causing the problem or that your pet might have eaten. So it'll be salivation, tremors, maybe vomiting and diarrhea and convulsions. So if any of those signs show, once again, off down to see your vet. But by far the safest way to do things is to make sure that the bulbs aren't within reach of your pets. And same in the garden. If you've got a dog that digs in the garden and might pull up bulbs, then make sure they're not where your dog can access them. If you have a pond in your garden, then it's a very good idea to make sure it has a pump, because what can happen at certain times of year, and this happens in Lake Burley Griffin and Lake Ginninderra as well, is that we can get algal blooms, overgrowth of blue-green algae, and this is also toxic to dogs. So if you do have a pond, then either make sure your pet can't access the pond, because often cats like to drink pond water as well, or make sure your pond is fenced off, or have a pump in there to try and keep the water aerated and keep it moving so your pets won't get blue-green algae poisoning. The final thing I wanted to mention is mushrooms. Sometimes if we have a wet spring or a wet autumn, they can pop up in our lawn, mushrooms and toadstools. And they're problematic for us if we eat them, and they're also toxic for our pets. So if you do see some mushrooms coming up in your sodden lawn, grab a piece of paper towel, scoop them all up and remove them. Particularly any toadstools. Death caps are really toxic for pets too and can kill them. And if your pet happens to chew on or eat something like that, that's just another cause for a visit to the vet and another vomit visit. So try to avoid it at all costs. Thank you for joining us for Floriade Reimagined Pet Stay In. I'm Karen Viggers and this is Toffee, and I hope you found some of this information very helpful for your time in the garden this spring.